You're listening to the official podcast of the Westside Vineyard in Los Angeles, a community of individuals and families connecting with God to change the world.
Well, it's good to see everyone this morning. This morning we have an opportunity to hear the voice of a father. And it's your father. To hear the voice of your father, my father. And what we hear in that voice is not the tyrant who is there merely to get everyone to follow them and live under their control so they can feel somehow valid. But nor is it the voice of one who is just a passive entity there to pretend that everything is okay all the time. It's the voice of one who is the beginning and end of all love. It's the voice of one who is able to confront what must be confronted, to help keep destruction from happening to those they love, and at the same time has the ability, the compassion, the power, the humility, if you can even say it, to be willing to go beyond what's fair in order to meet that need. And that's the voice of our Father in heaven. And we hear this voice through the prophets. For those who are less familiar, the prophets, you hear the term and you wonder, who are these prophets? Well, they're those who God kind of raised up. And kind of the big picture would be that we kind of went off on our own, and God starts to call a people to himself. And for those less familiar, it starts with a man named Abraham, and God calls out Abraham and says, I am going to make you a great nation. I'm going to be your God. I'm going to reveal myself to you. And through you, the whole world's going to be blessed, which we learned was through that lineage of the nation Israel, the Jewish people, comes the Messiah, comes Jesus. And so truly God does come to bless the whole world. But first he's making himself known over time and in history to these people, that they might know something of how we should live. Because if you don't know who you are, you don't know how to live. And so he's saying, this is who you are. You have no idea, humanity, who you are. This is who you are, and this is how you should live. And they didn't always do it well. And you find them going through the Old Testament, you find them going through these kind of cycles of faithfulness and returning to God and then kind of really failing. And that's kind of the dynamic. So God raises up these prophets. And he raises them up to be that voice. And they're kind of that voice from the outside because they're not as immersed in the way of the people. And he's looking for one who's faithful enough to somehow still hear God and then be able to speak to the people that they belong to and they love and they identify with. And I think sometimes we can relate to that idea that sometimes we think, wow, everything's gone crazy. Culture's going crazy. The world's gone crazy. And we have a sense that we need a voice from outside. Like we're so much a part of this that everything's kind of lost its way. And we have a sense that there's a voice that must come and speak to us and kind of clarify. And that's the voice of the prophets. And so this summer, starting today, through the summer, we're going to engage what are called the minor prophets. And minor is only a reference to the length of their writings, not to their importance. So you have these longer writings of Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, and then following that, the last 12 books of the Old Testament are these prophets who are minor because their writings are a little shorter, but their messages are major, very major. And they're speaking God's heart to the people in their condition. And what we're going to do is each week, we're not going to go through the whole of the book, but we're going to hear the heart of their message as it relates to us. And so today we're going to begin with the prophet Hosea. The prophet Hosea is the first of those minor prophets. And here you have a young man. We know he's young because of some of the history of his life, but also because we're going to see how many kings ruled and reigned during his time. And we begin, and you can look with me on Hosea 1, where as we read, God comes this young one, and it begins by saying, the word of the Lord that came to Hosea, son of Beri, during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, which is the two tribes in the south, now separated from the north, which is Israel, and during the reign of Jeroboam and Jehoash, king of Israel, which is to the north. And so Hosea is one who we find will be speaking primarily to the north. He lives in the north, and he is a prophet to the northern kingdoms who had far more stopped listening to God. They had just completely kind of found themselves drifted off, the way that all of us do, slowly. You don't stop and say, I'm going to just kind of find myself in this very different place and posture. But slowly you get there, and slowly they had, and now they're there. And now God is going to have to engage them. And so we see here how historically the 14 chapters of Hosea are like his writings being compiled throughout this period, and it kind of gives the story of what had unfolded. And we read in the very next verse these words, where it says in verse 2, when the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, go take to yourself an adulterous wife and children of unfaithfulness, because the land is guilty of the vilest adultery in departing from the Lord. So he went and married Gomer, daughter of Diblaim. And some of you are going, wait, did I just read that right? That isn't really in there. Yeah, it is. And it could kind of seem bizarre and striking and shocking and even a little scandalous, perhaps, what's going on, and it is. And what we find is that the people's hearts had grown so distant, and they've gone off in their own adulterous, spiritually adulterous ways, that God is now calling him, this young man, to himself become a symbolic representation of what the condition of the people. And you can imagine how these words must have felt for him. He's a young man who, like anybody else, he's looking forward to the day when he will have a wife who will love him and kids, and he can be proud of, and he can go out to the community and say, hey, these are my kids, and it's my wife, and he builds his whole future. And now he's having to receive that because God knew that he was one who was faithful, the one he could come to. God is inviting him, calling him to become this one who's going to bear this incredible disgrace. That he is being called to have to go and choose a wife who will be completely unfaithful the whole of his life. And he will live with this suffering and pain. We're not told, it's not clear in the phraseology, whether that she's already a prostitute and he's being told to go and make public shame from the start by marrying her, or whether it means as soon as you marry her, she will begin to be unfaithful. But either way, it means that as you take her to yourself, she will leave you. She'll cheat on you, and everyone will know it. She's going to lie to you. She's going to go find satisfaction with someone else, not you. And you're going to become really the brunt of all the jokes of your community. And there's no end to it. Imagine him taking that in. Oh, by the way, the next verses, they go on to describe how, and she will bear you children. In fact, the very next verse, and they bore a child, a son named Jezreel. Jezreel was the name of the city by which the people had so profoundly and violently violated God, destroying people who God had given them no justification to do, no permission to do, that it stood there and they were under judgment for what they had done in that city. So it would have been much like saying, hey, your first child, he's going to be named Dachau, Auschwitz. Something that everybody would feel horrible to think and be reminded of that city, the city of Hitler's death camps. That's the name of your child. Then she bore him a daughter. And you're to name her, God says, no pity. There'll be no pity for my people. Oh, that's a wonderful name. And then your third child, she bears him another son, and you're to name him not my people. You're not my people. Could you imagine going out and having your kids and calling them to dinner? Hey, Auschwitz, come here. And, hey, have no pity on, hey, and you're not my people. that's what he had to bear. He is taking in the heart of God and living it out. And he is going to experience what God experiences with the people, and that as he becomes symbolic to all that had taken place. And from this, he becomes one who grasps something of God and the nature of God's love. And what he grasps is what every human soul is defined by, and you need to be defined by, and I need to be defined by. These are the terms of love. And the first is this, is that the love of God is profoundly undeserved. The love of God is profoundly undeserved. You wonder how the people would have just come to him, time and time and said, Hosea, you're this young guy who's real faithful to God. You seem like a holy guy, and you're very faithful. So the question is, Hosea, how can you love an unfaithful woman like that? And I think soon Hosea began to realize, I understand, but I have a question for you. I'm beginning to wonder, how can a holy God love an unfaithful nation like us? He was bearing the question back to the people. How can a God who's faithful love a people like us? And that's what he begins to bring to bear because of these people. They had been so caught up in their own kind of adultery. And so they look upon him, of course, and say, she is just vile. I mean, she's so unfaithful. It's so offensive to see what she does to you. Having no grasp of the fact that it was a small picture of what they were doing to God every day. And the way they were living in an unfaithful, adulterous way to God. And that the spiritual adultery, it wasn't just a one-night stand. Hey, I kind of hung out with an idol last night. No, it wasn't that. It wasn't just the one-night stand in which one kind of gives their heart to another in a moment. No, they had just become people who had slowly, in their hearts, completely dishonored God. And so God is beginning to confront the people in this. God confronts the adultery, the unfaithful heart of giving our ultimate trust and hearts to another. And this is what Hosea begins to engage in the people. And I think it takes two primary fronts, two things that kind of reflect this unfaithfulness. And one of them is this, that the spiritual adultery, the spiritual unfaithfulness, it gives the honor due to the ultimate source of all of their gifts, all of their goods, to that which they had merely formed and fashioned as humans and then worshipped. And this we see at one point in which we hear God in Hosea 2:8, and it says this, that she, speaking of Gomer but also Israel, that she has not acknowledged that I was the one who gave her the grain, the new wine, the oil, lavished on her the silver and gold, which they used what? For Baal, which was kind of the local idea of God and the idolatry, that they would go to the temple and worship them. And it's believed that at some point Hosea was going to wherever he could find this wife in the night, and he would find out what lover she's staying with, and he would take care of her by bringing her the goods that she needed, knowing that the lover would not. And she would, of course, wake in the morning and think, oh, my lover has provided for me, when all along it was Hosea. How incredible. And this is, in a sense, though, what's saying we can do that. When we say, oh my gosh, I just love this restaurant. Oh my gosh, I just love this and that and this. All the stuff we're passionate in love about. Oh, it is so satisfying. Like, where did all the food come from? Like, where did it all come from? We are like people who just love and worship, give worth to all of the secondary sources, and we completely blow off the real source. And this is what we see as the people are doing. And secondly, we see that spiritual adultery makes alliances for security, giving her trust to that which will only use her and enslave her. Oh, I need to find my security in this, but in the end, it's not a source of security. It's a source of its own demise. And so what we find is that The people of Israel at that point, they were nervous because they saw the military powers around them and they really trusted military power. So they turned to the Assyrians on one side and the Egyptians on the other side. And they were kind of playing off both of them, hoping that they could make alliances. And this is what we read in Hosea, where God says, the people of Israel have become like silly, witless doves, first calling to Egypt, then flying to Assyria for help. It's like that little dove that's like, oh, I don't want to get trapped. Oh, I'll go over here. And in the end, they both are just able to take her. Or it says it a different way. In Hosea 12:1, it says, the people of Israel, they feed on the wind. They chase after the east wind, which was a horrible wind that would dry all the ground out. You wanted to avoid the east wind. It says they chase after the east wind all day long. Why? Because they pile up lies and violence. They are making an alliance with Assyria while sending olive oil to buy support from Egypt. They're taking the best of what they have to try to buy support and security. Does that sound like something that maybe we could find ourselves vulnerable to as well? The truth is, this kind of adultery, it seems offensive to us. Gomer seems kind of offensive in the way she's living out her life and the suffering of her husband, but truly, in a way, we can all be vulnerable. If there is a God, then we have pretty much kind of found ourselves giving our hearts away. And as I look at this, I realize how much this can challenge our own nature as I consider this, that we can be those who give our hearts to lesser loves, even if it means being unfaithful to the truest of love, which is God. I can give my heart to lesser loves, be more worried about them, be more committed to them, be more chasing after them, worry more about lesser loves. And that we can become those who give the honor that's due to God to that which is fashioned by human culture. I think of the way in which we can get so enamored with, a celebrity. Oh, they are just incredible. Really, what did they do for you? Oh, well, they sing this really insane song. They are like gods. It's like, where did music come from? Like we fashion things that we can then worship in so many different forms and ways. Or that we can be those for the sake of security, will give our allegiance to that which will ultimately use us. We can say, I need this so much, I'll do anything to win this relationship. But when we do it, and we're trying to win certain friends because they're going to make our lives somehow secure, it doesn't always work out that way when we sell ourselves that way. And this can be towards all sorts of, I'll do anything to have that position because that position will give me security. I'll do anything to own that thing because that thing will make me secure, but somehow it doesn't always work out that way. And the very thing we seek can enslave us. And the truth, as I look at these things, I face this hard truth. I read this story and I'm like offended by this woman, only to realize I'm her. I'm Gomer. You are Gomer. I'm sorry to say it. And if you're old enough and you remember Gomer Pyle, that's especially hard to say. Because right now you're like, any other name. Gomer Pyle was like not the brightest one in the room, but you can change the name. It's not, thank you, John. It's not about the name. It's about what they represent, what she represented. That can be true, this kind of unfaithfulness of heart that we can bring to this. And what we see is that Hosea is realizing something. The love of God is different than the love of human. The love of God is undeserved. The love of God is not rooted in the one that is loved. It is rooted in the one who loves. The love of God is not rooted in merit or warranted. It's rooted in the very existence of the one who loves, and that is why it is so distinct. God looks upon the one loved, and just like Hosea has been asked to love her, not because she's being so faithful and she's providing such satisfaction for his life. No, he loves her because he just is called to love her. She is the one whom he loves. And that's radically different. As Rabbi Zachariah said, if you think back maybe Hosea is beginning to think, who did God come to in the first place? He's saying, I'm going to make myself known. In all of history, he did it when you had some of the greatest empires. So if God is going to say, I'm going to make myself, I am going to find that which I will love. I look at Greece. Greece, that which births the greatest minds and the greatest philosophers, those who think deeply about life. Plato, Aristotle, Socrates. We are still footnoting these lives in terms of wisdom. But it doesn't go to Greece. Or Rome. Rome wasn't built in a day. Rome's a big deal. Rome grew to be this powerful, incredible empire. It doesn't go to Rome. Or Babylon. Babylon had the most incredible palaces. They knew how to have a sense of, pomp and prestige. He doesn't go to Babylon. He goes to a tiny people who nobody would even have noticed. He goes to a group of people who Greece would laugh at. Rome would bully and abuse, and Babylon would enslave. He goes to them. He's not interested on how they're going to make him look. He's not interested in whether they're worthy. He chooses and says, they're the apple of my eye. That's what he says of them. It's what he says and says towards us. I love you not because of your merits. See, this love is rooted in himself. He is the only non-created being. He has no need to be met by anything outside of himself. And that is what is so distinct. That is why the love of God is so profound, so fundamentally undeserved. There's no need that you fulfill. He loves you, period. That is why when if you say to somebody, hey, I love you, and they don't reciprocate and they don't respond to your love, you feel hurt because what? You lost something. When God says, I love you, and one doesn't reciprocate, God also is hurt. But it's not because he lost anything. It's because he knows that the one he loves lost something. It's a different love. It is the only love like it. It is the perfection of all love. It's what God draws us into, but only he can perfectly live this out. And this grows more dramatic as you see where Hosea is called to go. We begin with chapter 3, and it picks up that Hosea has been living in this pain, this scandal, this shame. And now listen to the words of God as we discover that Gomer has been living this life, and now perhaps in prostitution, someone says, I don't need you, I'm going to sell you. And she is sold. And at that time, in most cultures, slavery was a part of the culture. And there might be the weekly gathering, many said it was at least once a week, in which there would be a time of auction. And anybody who was interested could come out and buy one of the slaves. And they would recognize her because everybody kind of knew her background. She had ended up where she belonged, but not. It's not the place you want to go as a husband. Now listen to these words in Hosea 3 where it begins. Then the Lord said to me, God speaking to Hosea, go and love your wife again. Wow, that's a lot to take in. Even though she commits adultery with another lover, this will illustrate that the Lord still loves Israel, even though the people have turned to other gods and love to worship them. So I bought her back for 15 pieces of silver and 5 bushels of barley and a measure of wine. Wow. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine him making his way to the crowds? And he's kind of behind everyone, and people are shouting out, I'll give this, I'll give that. And this is the price of a common slave. And he kind of raises his hand and ends up buying back his wife. And you can imagine the sense of disgrace that is there. I mean, this is just scandalous. And we think she's scandalous. We think this scandal is Gomer. This is scandalous of this wife to do this. You know what the real scandal is? The love of Hosea and the love of God. That's the scandal. This is a scandalous love in which he is bearing and what God bears in a disgrace. This is a disgraceful people being met by a God who's willing to disgracefully love. And that is the love of God. And that's what God's bearing for the one he loves, and that's what he bears for us. And I think this is so hard for us at times because we just live with this sense that love has to be fair. Love has to be fair. I mean, I'm okay with maybe 51-49 or something if it's equal, but let's not get crazy about it, And so we just operate with that. And so the people are saying, this is ridiculous, this is unfair. Why should you be buying back your wife? When they don't understand, you're right. It's not fair that God would even love you at this point and care about you and do anything towards you. What we deserve is, we don't want to go there. But this is God's ability to be that which would bear disgrace. And it's profound. It is so profound. We have this part of us who sometimes thinks, if I feel like I'm loving somebody and it's not fair, I feel a little bit of a shame. Like I shouldn't do that. That's just not fair. That's wild, because God is so beyond fairness. So beyond fairness. And I want to say to you fathers, perhaps you fathers have or will, and perhaps any of us, a point in which you feel like, I just feel kind of dishonored. I feel like in the things I'm called to do, I have to do something that nobody understands or appreciates. And there's kind of disgrace in it. I kind of feel like, that may be the moment in which you are the most powerful and profound. When you love beyond fairness, when you are willing to take disgrace for the sake of loving another who doesn't deserve it, that may be your highest moment. That might be when we're most like God. And that's what we see coming together for here. And it's this kind of love that we see. Secondly, Hosea would say, the love of God is desperately needed. It is the love that we need to have this kind of love. Every human soul was created to be loved, not to prove that they are worthy of love. And there is the difference. It is beyond merely, you're loved because of some functional value you have. Now, it's a good thing for us to be able to affirm the successes in life, affirm the values and the skills and the things that you and I might achieve. It's a great thing to affirm them. I finally sat with my kids last night, and we just finally were together, and I'm like trying to, affirm some of the accomplishments in their lives. But I also find a part of me saying, but it's not, I don't love you because you did that. And that is what's so profoundly real about God, is that God is so clear, and you and I need to get clear. He alone is able to say this to you. You are not loved because you're valued. You're valued because you're loved. You're not loved because you've provided some functional thing. You finally prove I'm faithful, I'm good enough, I'm decent enough, and therefore you're loved. No. God values you because he loves you, period. He's always loved you. You could do nothing. It is not our competencies. It is just because God chose to create something that can bear his image and that he loves, and he loves you. That is his heart, and he has to bear that heart to those no matter how unfaithful. And this is something that the naturalistic worldview can offer nothing to. And I know, it's wonderful to think, maybe there's just nothing. And it's just really the survival of the fittest. It's kind of like that is all that happens. There's just a vacuum, and there's no transcendence. Well, then there is nothing that loves you unless you somehow prove that you are better than somebody else. That's it. But no, there is God's love, and this is what we desperately need. Now, to that, we might think, does that make God therefore, just he sits back and just has no way to awaken the human soul? Well, this is what we see thirdly that Hosea brings forth, and that is that the love of God will allow us to face the needs that we have sought others to meet. And this is what we see running through Hosea, where God continues to come to her, and he can't wake her up. She is living her life. She is living a life in which she's running off to all these other lovers, his people, Gomer, symbolically of it. And it says this in chapter 2. It says, she will chase after her lovers, but not catch them. She will look for them, but not find them. Then she will say, I will go back to my husband as at first, for then I was better off than now. She has not acknowledged that I was the one, as we read before, who gave her the grain, the new wine and oil, who lavished on her the silver and gold, which they used for Baal. Therefore, he says, and he would say something perhaps similar for the way he loves us, therefore I will take away my grain when it ripens, and my new wine when it's ready, and I will take back my wool and my linen intended to cover her nakedness. What we hear is that at some point God realizes that he needs to awaken her, and so he will remove those things to see if it doesn't help her to face the consequences of seeking to satisfy in others what they cannot satisfy, to find themselves hungry, not merely for food, but hungry also of soul, to find themselves uncovered, yes, in clothing, but perhaps more deeply in their own souls. See, God understands that we're a little bit like the frog in the kettle, the proverbial frog in the kettle. The frog hops in and goes, oh, this is nice, it's warm, as the kettle sits on the stove. But the water continues to get warmer, and the frog doesn't notice because it just happens slowly. And pretty soon what was once just comfortable is now cooking. And the frog inevitably just dies not realizing what's happening. And he's saying, you are like that. You don't understand. See, this kind of, we call it tough love in our current culture. But that idea of tough love is to understand you will face consequences long term that are greater than the consequences now. So I will allow consequences that you will face and that you will feel, because those things might awaken you before you face the consequences that are greater for the place that you're in and what you're seeking to do. And so it is that God brings that to bear. And this is really quite profound what he's saying, because he's showing and revealing that God is not like us. The human anger is about retribution. When we have anger, our natural sense, where we go, is to say, I want you to experience everything you what? Deserve. And I got to make sure that you fully experience it, because this is about retribution. He's saying, but the anger of God is not about retribution. It does not look and say, I need you to make sure that you experience enough to make sure that you get retribution. No. It's about restoration. I want you to experience enough to see if it can't awaken you, that you might not feel a bit of your emptiness enough to realize that you've been looking for love in the wrong places. And so he leaves her, as it says, unclothed, facing her own nakedness. And I think it speaks of that place in which many of us might realize that we can find ourselves when we're kind of uncovered by life. And maybe it's like, I feel kind of vulnerable. I feel like the people I'm looking to for love, they can't totally get me. And I'm not sure anybody totally gets me. That's right. And I'm not sure that anything can totally secure me. I'm starting to wonder that. That's right. And we start to feel and wonder about these things. And what do? Not only do most of us feel those things, most of us know and would say that that's when I begin to want to grab things to cover myself up. I want to grab a new relationship. I want to grab a new possession. I want to grab something to cover up my own vulnerability. And this is what God is saying we will do. We will be quick to try to grab and cover, but there's got to be that place in which we're not afraid of our longings. We're not afraid to say, maybe I'm supposed to feel a bit uncovered. Maybe I'm supposed to feel that the answers that I've said I have to life are not entirely there and cannot be met by the means by which I'm trying to meet them. And then we go, oh, I am maybe one who needs to come home. That maybe we as a culture don't have it all, figured out. We're very proud of our, we're always thinking that we have become the brightest, but there's so many ways in which we need to kind of realize we don't have all the answers. We're kind of at a time where almost our byline, if you could have it for our culture, is, look, I'm just gonna be my own person. That's our thing. I love it. I mean, that's like our motto, if you could have it. Welcome to the human world. I'm just going to be myself. I think God would say, you're free to do that. Now tell me, who are you? Now tell me, I'm just curious, who are you? And where have you learned that? Who told you? Because somebody told you. And well, we were those who were like, you know what? I just want to bring down all the boundaries. I think I want to just say that nothing matters. And let's strip it all down. God would say, you can. It's kind of in chaos as I see it anyway, so go ahead. What do you think is there? What is it that you have when you tear it down? What is it? No one answers that. G.K. Chesterton said something quite wise when he said, any time you remove a fence, pause long enough to find out why it was put up there in the first place. There's something about us thinking that I tore down the fence. Well, did you ever stop to think, why? What is there? And this is where we can find ourselves and we realize there is something unique to God's love we desperately need. And lastly, Hosea would reveal that the love of God offers a new hope, a radical new hope. God isn't interested in merely saying, look, let's just try to get along. Let's just make it better. He's like, no, my love for you has such a bigger picture in mind of what this is about. And we read the first inkling of this in Hosea chapter 2, where God says this, therefore, I am now going to allure her. He's speaking of his people Israel here. I am going to allure her. I will lead her into the desert and speak tenderly to her. Can you hear what he's saying? I'm going to lead her into a place in which she will feel dry, that she will feel her need. But then, that is the place when she feels her need, that I will be able to speak tenderly, to engage her, meet her in her need. There I will give back to her vineyards, and I will make the valley of Achor a door of hope. Achor is just a Hebrew word for trouble. The valley of her troubles, the place she finds her, I will make that a door of hope. You can find hope right in that place in which God meets us in our troubles. And he goes on to say, there she will sing as in the days of her youth, as in the days she came up out of Egypt. When she first realized that she was free and not enslaved, I will bring that back to bear. In that day, declares the Lord, you will call me my husband. You will no longer call me my master. You will understand what I've been to you is the faithful lover, not the one who you deem as a master. That right there is the biggest change that many of us in this room need. Because we're fighting God as if we think he's just a mere master, that we need to fight him for our freedom. And the whole time he's saying, really, you're free. You're free. I'm your husband who's staying faithful to you. Now you decide what you want to do. I will remove the names of the Baals, that is the idols, from her lips. No longer will their names even be invoked. In that day I will make a covenant for them, and the beasts of the field and the birds of the air and the creatures that move along the ground. Bow and sword and battle I will abolish from the land, so that all may lie down in safety. Here we begin to see he is speaking of something even greater, a time in which all the conflict that they were trying to avoid will be no more. And the conflict that you and I feel in this world and say, gosh, it's just so full of conflict. Yes, military, yes, this, but just even more. There's just conflict. One day it will be no more. This is God speaking of something even greater that his love is seeking. And he says, I will betroth you to me when? Forever. Forever. I will betroth you in righteousness and justice, in love and compassion. I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will acknowledge the Lord. And here, Hosea is revealing that the love of God brings this profound hope. And it's a hope that we only catch glimpses of in this world. Because, as I said before, what we're hearing is the voice of God, who is, on this Father's Day, we're reminded, the Father of all fathers, his love is the beginning of all love and the end of all love. Everything you and I long for, every one of us in this room that says, I wish maybe that I could have loved my father better, that they loved me better, all of that. There's something much bigger at hand. It's the love of our Heavenly Father for us and our love in response to him. And that is what is at hand. My sister this morning, my sisters and I, our parents passed away about 3 years ago, a little more. And we were just texting early this morning, and my sister said, I wish I could just hug him again. And I thought the same thing. I so wish that I thought I could honor him more, that I could have said more to honor my father. But I'll tell you something, I'm struck by a bigger challenge. There's one who I have not even come close to honoring. I'm like adulterous to. And the question is, where are we in relationship to the beginning and end of all love? My father's love was but a metaphor, but a mediation of that love. The love that I live out of, the love that he lives out of, was all rooted in God. And today I have a chance to make sure that I am honoring the one I can honor right now. And understand that his love is incredible, that he owns me, that he's loved me, that it is never about what I've done, it's about just his love for me and my response to that. And we're told that God looks upon us and says, I love you because I created you and I redeemed you. I bought you back. Like Hosea bought Gomer, I bought you back. And this is what we're told, how he bought us back. This is what Jesus did. Jesus comes and he pays the price. He bears my sin, my shame, my separation. And God says, I would do this for you. I would suffer my own sense of loss in some mysterious way in the Godhead of Father, Son, and Spirit to have you. Do you understand that? That's how much you're valued. There's a story that I just read about this boy who builds himself a boat. And this is his big thing. This is like his project, man. I'm going to make this boat. It's going to be the ultimate boat. So he builds it out of, wood, and then he gets the sails, and then he paints it, and he gets it all just right and puts all the right markings. And the day comes when it's like, it's time for a boat to go into the lake. So he gets down to the lake that's nearby, and he places it in the water. He's got the sail up, and it works. And it begins to float and move about. But then it begins to work too well, and it starts to move out of reach, and he's starting to try to follow it, and he can't. The winds have blown beyond, and it's taken off with the winds, and it gets out of reach and then out of sight. And he's just utterly devastated. And he goes home, and his mom sees him, and she's like, what's the matter? Did it work? He goes, yeah, it worked too well. And it just, the winds, it just let itself take and be blown by the wind, but I couldn't stop it. And he's just devastated. There's nothing that really could be done. And then it says that he was walking down through their small town, through their little downtown area, and there's a secondhand store, and what does he see in the window? He's looking through, and he's like, that's it. That's my boat. So he comes rushing in, grabs the boat, starts walking out of the store, because it's his boat. And the owner says, hey, you can't take that. And he says, yeah, it's my boat. Look, and he shows him the markings on it and stuff. And it's like, look, that's what he goes, it may be your boat, but I paid money for that boat. I bought that boat. You can't just take it. You'd have to buy it from me. I have to buy it. It's my boat. It's my creation. Finally realizes he has to do it, so he doesn't have the money. So he works the rest of the summer, and he saves and he saves and he saves, and finally he brings it all together, and he buys it back. And it says as he walked out of the store, he's clutching this boat, just saying, you're mine. You're mine twice. You're mine first because I created you. And you're mine twice because I bought you. That's God's heart for you this morning. You're his because he created you. But now even more profoundly, when you and I had nothing of our merit to go, well, I'm pretty worth it, God. No, you're not. You don't add anything to God. He just loves you. And he's willing to wait. He's willing there. And he has been willing to buy back. But we have to ask, do we give ourselves to the winds to be blown because we've been blown away by the winds of much? Or do we accept that we really were created and bought by another? And that's the invitation for God, for us to know that love. Let's pray. God, today we come as those who, in the uniqueness of a Father's Day, in which our our culture so rightfully stops to acknowledge that there's something profound in our humanity. There's something about the love and the source of a Father to our very existence that we long for, and yet we will always still find that it only points us to something deeper, something that cannot be fully met by any father. So many of us in this room have known that it has not been fully met. And many of us have known that we have not fully met it as fathers, but we stop before you, the one in whom all love finds its beginning and its end. We come before your love, and we invite you to open our hearts and minds to understand that everything we long for is met in you, that we have turned to many things that will not satisfy, and that many of us who can feel something of the valley of trouble, something of the desert, something of the dryness of this world, and we've known times of dry, we've known times of trouble. May these things lead us back to you. And may they lead us to know that this world is rooted in a love that is beyond mere functionality. It is rooted in truly you who has existed forever. And may we find our lives rooted in you. May we know that you are not the tyrant who comes to control, nor you're the passive one, but you're the one in whom our lives are rooted. You're our Father, and we are those who are loved. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you for listening to the official broadcast of the Westside Vineyard in Los Angeles. Tune in for next week's message.